What's up, Headspaces? It's VJ, the brother from the ancient mother. Another review where we focus on musical projects within hip-hop that are breaking waves, making moves in the African continent, and kind of investigating how African artists on the continent are navigating rap music as they do it, as they live it, as they breathe it through their bodies of work. Now, the artist I'm going to talk about is probably one of the most notable voices of Africa that the continent has exported in terms of hip-hop. And I think even putting it in terms where the continent exports her is not really being genuine to the narrative. I'm talking about Sampa The Great, an artist who is Zambian born, raised, and had navigated in spaces like Australia for a while, kind of garnering an audience, has moved to spaces like the UK to express this broad market of Africans in the diaspora who are kind of really learning to tap into the best aspects of their Africanness and still channel this into capitalistic and appealing ways. Sampa's no different. She's an artist of our times, but she's an artist of our times who breathed an indigenous voice into her music. She literally drips Zambia, and I mean this in the sense that she's very deliberate. Her aesthetic, the way she situates her music conceptually. So her latest project, As Above So Below, is no different. It's yet another edition in a consistent series of Sampa speaking to the unique and powerful voice of Africans as they engage with hip-hop and the art form of rap. And it does this mainly using this theme of spirituality, which I think this project speaks to fundamentally, but it speaks to spirituality in a context that is unorthodox for most African artists. Now, it's very immediate as an African to speak in spiritual themes. We're people who are kind of bathed in the mythology of our immediate and distant ancestors. So Africa tends to be surrounded by this mystical charm, this known legendary magical realism. So I think as an African artist in any space, one is expected to speak to the gods and the ancestors in some form or the other. The difference about As Above So Below is that it's very interesting that it uses a spiritual phrase that has kind of been popularized by Hermeticism, which kind of is rooted in the cultures of ancient Egypt. So this ancient comedic value of within the smallest things we see the design of the biggest things. Within that which we do see, we see the implicit purpose of what we can see. Within that which we can tap into, we see the ends and perhaps the teleological, which simply just a fancy word which means the sacred directive and the cosmic vision and the destiny of that which we do not. As above, so below simply means that maybe God is lurking beneath what we don't see through the ways that we do on the surface. And it's a very interesting phrase to use to weave into the theme of what I feel this project represents as it moves itself thematically, which is futurism. Sampa is an unapologetic Afro-futurist, and for any who don't know what that is, I don't know where you've been. You must have been under a rock for the past 20 years, because Afrofuturism since the late 90s to the early 2000s was a popular theme that was kind of repopularized by the advent of artists like Andre 3000, taking what was basically invented by core artists like Funkadelic, Sandra, and other artists within the black jazz and funk space who were re-envisioning the possibility of the African in the future. The fact that because we live in a world that's thoroughly colonized and that speaks to enslaving the African, is there a future where an African even exists? Are we living in a world that simply works to make us into an extinct species and mines our culture and art simply to make it a commodity that it can use for its own capitalistic legacy? Do we see distant futures, space ages, alien ages, ages where humanity might be on the brink of floating outside of the planet and terraforming into other parts of the solar system? Do we see black people in that? Now, it's a very interesting concept in and of itself, because if one does the very unique history of cosmogony and the earliest ideas of astronomy, you'll find that many African tribes actually primarily saw into the way that astronomy worked before even a lot of modern day inventions. For instance, when we talk about the Dogon, who conceptualized, mythologically represented, and spoke of a distant star which accurately was later found to be Sirius B in a time where Sirius B didn't even exist. It speaks to an age where Africans knew the stars in ways that Europe hadn't even envisioned yet. So to wear my Hotep hat, black people soar into the future of space travel even before whiteness was even conceptualized as a political idea. Blackness, this indigenous walking of the earliest people who migrated from this great and amazing continent and were able to fundamentally create some of the basic things and stuff that we take for granted today, like fucking watching the sky, and how that affected things like the way we count our days, our years, and basically the virtual creation of time and space conceptually through science, physics, and mathematics was fundamentally pioneered by Africans. So when we zap into that history and ask the questions of whether or not Africans could be in the future, belong in the future, would end up in the future, Afrofuturism attempts to ask this question by looking at our past. It says Sankofa, which is this historical idea of not knowing the possible future if we don't look at where our past has come from. Sampa does that. She, in velvet and honorary style, taps into the history of the African people, particularly through her coding as a Zambian. Now, Zambia is a very interesting country, named after the Zambezi River in and of itself, a country that in its colonial hold was represented by revolutionaries like Kenneth Kaunda, who, fun fact, was a musician himself. It's very interesting to look at where the country has kind of surfaced to in today's predicament, in yet another context of capitalism and kind of still reproducing for the ends and doing what needs to be done to get by. Now, she goes into the depths of where her people are, where she has been, and travels this orbit of the story of a Zambian artist in this modern day world, projecting into the possibility of what the future holds. And she does this through utilizing what I think is the best of modern day music. She filters in some trap music, using the indigenous drums, painting these transcendent themes of the mystical power of African people in lyrics that are, to be honest, fucking hard as a motherfucker. Sampa exhibits a confidence and an energy that is just resoundingly funky and always taps into the coyest, sassiest, and most self-controlled and assertive part of a human being. She tells stories that are gentle, but she always does them with swag. Her unapologetic accents dives into places that are audible, but also special enough to kind of make you feel like we might be diving into unique pockets of how to enunciate and pronounce certain words. She chooses to sing in ways that echo the primordial patterns of her own people. I could go on and on. My point is, she's fucking authentic. She's a word to the fullest, and if you know anything about this channel, we're always questioning African rappers as they position themselves in the world. We're always questioning this impulse that many an African rapper faces to subject their own culture to the whims of what is popular right now in the space. And what that does is that it, yes, neglects their own locality, but it also alienates them in a place where they can never truly be acknowledged for who they are, because they just try to be a second-rate version of somebody else, but not Sampa. I think the great is very, very suitable because she positions herself in that moment. She says, what is greatness? Greatness is tapping into the best of where you come from to understand how to take it into your future. She foresees a future where Africa, not in a romantic sense, where we are the new America or the new Britain, but in a sense where we tap into the very same energy that created the pyramids, that created Timbuktu, that created Great Zimbabwe. This innate ingenuity of an African in Africa without pandering to global themes of what it means to be modern. She speaks of futurism and progress in ways that are about understanding integrity, understanding about who's good to you and how to be good to them, and how to allow the art to be an expression of that goodness so that it does nothing but permeate a wellness that makes everybody in the world just feel good. So essentially, Sampa is a feel-good music artist. She is on a mission to kind of paint a black rainbow that strands all the way from the west back to Africa and leads people back into a mythological promised land that leads them into not an actual place per se, but perhaps the ideas needed to build the best of anything anywhere. And I think she does this really well because she knows a couple of things. One, you can't do it alone. So as with every one of her projects, with this one, she's able to navigate some of the best allies you could ever possibly have as an African rapper. Motherfucking Joey Badass and other artists such as why am I forgetting the brother's name? Such as so and so. I'm gonna mention him later. I'm gonna edit it. She taps into the best allies possible to literally form an African super team of Pan-African rappers who, from the UK to the United States to here on the continent, are here to unite and become evidence of the fact that as much as we have been fragmented in different aspects of the world, we're still one unified people who have a common struggle. And that is to allow the Western world to acknowledge the humanity and the spirit that it tried to destroy in us by finding a place for the spirit to thrive and live in a world we feel is modern, postmodern, or perhaps futuristic. And she does this so elegantly with beats that sparsely move between the efficacious noise of tribal drum patterns, skipping back into trap, and still bellowing into soothing R&B influenced funky tunes. My goodness, Sampa has successfully created a style that is neo-African experimentalism at its best, and I think she continues with this project to build this model or perhaps framework of what new African artistry in rap is all about. Chuck D recently said the future of rap music is in Africa because we are people who speak most often more than one language. English by virtue of colonialism, our own indigenous tongue, and perhaps many others because Africa tends to move in diversity like any other part of the world. But what makes us special is that we're able to easily understand the global black experience while tapping into the experience that resides within the ancestral soil of Africa, the unique sounds of our own phonetic coding. And if that doesn't bridge hip-hop into places that it hasn't gone in terms of the vocal projection of rap, I don't know what does. I second Chuck D's declaration, perhaps premonition, by giving you this album as an example of the fact that if African rap, if African hip-hop isn't where the future of rap and hip-hop is as a whole, then rap and hip-hop doesn't have a future. Yeah, I said it. So I'm VJ the brother from the ancient mother. If you don't agree with me, please subscribe. What am I giving this project? I'm giving this project ultimately an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10. The only reason it doesn't reach that benchmark for me is because I think a lot of the songs live in this same universe, and it isn't a universe that is tinted with a lot of color, but it's definitely broad enough for you to feel like every planet that moves in this orbit is in alignment to something that is sustainable and that will live as it moves through its eternal cycle. So for me, it's not really a classic, but it's close to it. It makes the edge of that, and it perhaps asks the question of what could have been missing for it not to be. And like I said, it does tend to be a little too channeled into one reality, which I think could have spoke for more emotional depth, because she speaks to, yes, trial and tribulation, but in ways that are still kind of distanced from the individual sense. She speaks in archetypes, she speaks in poeticisms that speak for a general African audience, but I think more could have been done to speak a little bit more from the soul. Other than that, brilliant project as a whole. I love this new era of rappers who are showing us that being in America is no longer a secret life hack to decoding and literally being successful as a rapper. And that excites me. It excites me as somebody who's loved hip-hop on the continent, and it excites me about the possibilities of living in a continent that's been trained to not believe in itself. That perhaps the internet, with its redirecting of attention and its direct reliance on the fact that people have nothing but their own value to bring out into the world, and that it's no longer being sold indirectly by large corporates, creates a new possibility of how we could push the value of our own culture to the rest of the world. Please subscribe to this channel if you're all about African rap and African hip hop. Much love.